What's the worst fire type Pokemon? Seems like it should be a pretty simple question, but I have a feeling that if I don't want people to show up with pitchforks outside my apartment, I need to set some things straight. First and foremost, I'm only talking about these Pokemon in the official competitive format and how good they are, or more specifically, how bad they are. I'm not talking about design. I'm not talking about a moral value. I'm only talking about how easy it is to win with them in the official competitive format. So if your favorite Pokemon's on this list, I'm not saying it's bad. I like a lot of the Pokemon on this list. Okay, I feel bad putting them here, but I have to. Okay, this is my mission. This is what I was put on this earth to do, to rank bad fire type Pokemon. Those of you who've been following this channel for a while may be familiar with the fact that I recently finished doing the best Pokemon of every type series. And I thought this could be a fun little counterpart to that series since we're done with all 18 types. This is a bit harder though, because like, while I could talk about tournament results when it came to good Pokemon, almost all the Pokemon on this list have no tournament results. So instead I'm talking about their potential and more specifically what holds them back and what makes them, well, not good Pokemon, competitively speaking, okay? In order for this video to actually be interesting, I'll only be talking about Pokemon in their final form. Obviously, like, there's lots of unevolved fire type Pokemon that aren't viable, but that would not be a very interesting video to tell you, oh yeah, Larvesta, it's hard to win with Larvesta, right? Anyway, with all that being said, fire is actually a pretty good type, so much so that I actually struggled to find 10 Pokemon to put on this list. We'll be starting from the least bad and working our way up to the single worst fire type Pokemon, so if your favorite's on this list, you better hope that it's in the bottom half. And I have a feeling that a lot of you are gonna like the number 10 Pokemon on our list, Houndoom. I think Houndoom is an incredible design. I feel like I should preface by saying this. I actually like Houndoom a lot. I think it's a really iconic and really memorable Pokemon from Johto, and it even has a Mega Evolution, which is actually the main reason why Houndoom is so low on this list, why it's number 10 and not, higher up, because Mega Houndoom is actually quite good. Houndoom's typing is Fire and Dark, which is pretty good, as it turns out. But because it was introduced in Johto, it doesn't have very good stats. What I mean by that is basically as the generations go on, Pokemon tend to get stronger and stronger. And so if we look back at Pokemon from the early generations now, they tend to struggle a bit compared to like newer additions to the franchise. Okay, so Houndoom doesn't have great stats, but I mean, let's be honest, there are plenty of Pokemon who are good that don't have very good stats, so it's not like the stats alone make the Pokemon. But the stats aren't the only thing holding Houndoom back. Its abilities are not super good, and by not super good, I mean actually pretty, they're not terrible, but they're not good, It has Early Bird, Flash Fire, and Unnerve. Early Bird means you wake up earlier if you're put to sleep, but Houndoom has bad like survivability, so you can just knock it out. You don't need to put it to sleep. Flash Fire is a useful ability, but it's mostly useful because like it gives you an immunity to a type. Houndoom already resisted fire and also isn't bulky enough to really stay on the field for long enough that an extra immunity is that helpful. And then Unnerve is actually quite a useful ability, but it's better on Pokemon that either have insane damage output so that they can turn off, type resist berries, stuff like that, or it's useful in Pokemon that are going to be really bulky and stick around. Houndoom is neither. So actually in this case, all the abilities are kind of lackluster because the stats are bad. The main redeeming quality of Houndoom is Mega Houndoom, who actually has a very good ability, which is Solar Power. Solar Power gives the user a huge damage boost if the strong sunlight is active, which is a really good ability. Mega Houndoom is also a good Mega Evolution, not in the sense that it's good compared to the other Megas, but in the sense that it doesn't waste any stat points. All Mega Evolutions get 100 bonus stat points total when they Mega Evolve, and none of Houndoom's are wasted. It's actually a very efficient use of the stat points, where it gets a fair bit of power, a decent bit of speed, and then a good amount in its defenses, making it actually respectably bulky is the wrong word, but it won't go down to like every attack anymore. I think the main thing that held Mega Houndoom back as a Mega Evolution was the fact that in order to bring out its full power, you really want the sunlight to be active, and the best way of setting the sun up is with a Pokemon who does it naturally via the ability Drought. But the problem is that the best Drought setter for a lot of the time that Mega Houndoom was around was Mega Charizard, and you can't Mega Evolve 2 Pokemon on your team. So Mega Houndoom doesn't really have any results, but it also wasn't the single worst Pokemon of all time, but if you wanted to use it, it would be a bit difficult. With Mega Evolution returning Legend ZA, I think there's a small chance that Mega Houndoom could be good again, but it's not super likely because again, it is one of the worst fire types of all time. Okay, coming in at number 9 is a bit of a weird pick. It's Magmortar. I think I say that funny. There was a video I made where I talked about Magmortar a lot, and I got a lot of comments saying that I said it weird, but I feel like I'm saying it the way that it's spelled, so I don't know. What's weird about Magmortar is the fact that Magmar, its pre-evolution, is actually quite good. The reason why Magmar is good is because it can hold the special item that can only be held by Pokemon who have not fully evolved yet, called the Eviolite, which increases their bulk by a considerable amount. And this item is so good, in fact, that it effectively makes Magmar tankier than Magmortar, even if you factor in giving Magmortar a different item like Leftovers or Citrus Berry to recover HP. And the reason why Magmar and Magmortar care so much about their defenses is because of the fact that they get access to one of the best moves in the official competitive format called Follow Me. Follow Me is a move that many of you are probably familiar with. It was used on the infamous Pachirisu that won the World Championships in 2014. It basically forces the opponent to target the user instead of the user's partner. And in the double battle format that we play, that's quite strong as it turns out. But because you're basically using your follow me user as a punching bag, staying alive is actually pretty important. The more attacks you tank, the more you can protect your teammates. And this is the main reason to use Magmar or Magmortar instead of another fire type Pokemon. And basically it's not like Magmortar is a terrible Pokemon, which is part of the reason it's not higher up on this list. The problem is that Magmar and Magmortar, like their best role is to be used as this like defensive punching bag, but Magmar does it better. And every single time Magmortar is around, Magmar is also legal because you can't get Magmortar without Magmar. The other thing is that Magmortar actually gets slower when it evolves, which isn't the biggest deal, and it doesn't get that much slower, but there are times where the speed actually matters, especially on a supporting Pokemon. Sometimes Magmar is going to want to click Overheat or Flamethrower. Sometimes even Will-O-Wisp is used as a supporting option. And so like while the speed doesn't matter when you're using Follow Me or Helping Hand or Protect, some of these other supporting moves, it can still be impactful. Magmortar is kind of set up to be a special attacking sweeper because it actually has a good special attack stat, but because it's like kind of in the middle when it comes to speed, it's not so easy to use it outside of Trick Room because it's relatively slow, but it's also fast enough that it doesn't work that well inside of Trick Room, in addition to not being all that strong. Basically, because Magmortar doesn't have a strong role to fill of its own, and because it's kind of just worse than Magmar in the best role that it has, it's a little bit irrelevant most of the time. I do like Magmortar. I think the design is awesome, but I think the best thing that Magmortar did was give Magmar the ability to use the Eviolite. Now, my plan at the moment is to do a series for the worst Pokemon of every single type. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss future uploads, make sure you subscribe. YouTube's algorithm can be a little finicky, and so sometimes you might want to watch a video from a creator or at least want to be notified that it exists. And if you don't subscribe, it's less likely that you'll be shown that. It also helps the channel out when you subscribe. So if you want to support myself or the over 30 people who work on this channel, it's like, it doesn't cost anything and it helps us out a lot. I also want to say thanks to everyone who has subscribed. I really don't take it for granted. And I really appreciate everyone watching this video as well. Like, you all have limited time, and I appreciate that you spend some of it with me and my videos. Anyway, coming in at number 7, people are going to be angry about this one, but I need you to wait a second before you start typing an angry comment, okay? Number 7 is Darmanitan. And the reason why I think people are going to be mad about this is because in the single battle format, Darmanitan is actually quite good. I think Darmanitan has been one of the best Pokemon before. However, I'm talking only about the official competitive format, and so in this format, Darmanitan has effectively 0 results in its base form. Darmanitan also has a Galarian version, which is an ice type Pokemon, and then when it transforms, or it has a mode where it can transform and it changes types. We're not talking about that here. I'm talking strictly about the Unovan Darmanitan. I think that Darmanitan is one of the coolest Pokemon from a design perspective because Darmanitan has 2 abilities. The first is Sheer Force. Sheer Force is just a good ability. It boosts your damage. It's actually a very good ability, okay? The second ability is called Zen Mode, and it's a unique ability, and it's effectively never used, at least in the official competitive format. Not just because Darmanitan is never used in the official competitive format, but Zen Mode basically transforms Darmanitan from this like angry gorilla thing into this, I mean, what I can only describe as a statue. It's a really, really weird like looking thing. I really don't get it, but I think it's really cool. And the cool thing about Zen Mode is that when Darmanitan transforms, its stats completely change. It goes from being this like really frail physical attacker to this really, really, really bulky and really powerful special attacker. The stats are actually ridiculous. If it could start the battle in Zen Mode, I think that it would be like it might have been on the best fire types of all time list. The problem with Zen Mode is that you can't start the battle in Zen Mode. You have to lose half your health first. And you might think, oh, like just drop to 50%, like eat a citrus berry, go back up. But the problem is that if you go back over 50%, you go back to like gorilla mode. And so there's basically no way to have this Pokemon be healthy and in Zen Mode. So basically Darmanitan has 2 abilities, but Zen Mode is kind of like not easily accessible at the very least. Like you can't, there's no good way to actually use it. So it effectively has 1 ability. And Sheer Force is a great ability. And I think part of what makes Darmanitan so strong in single battles is that it does a lot of damage. Like Darmanitan is a fast-ish, but really strong physical attacker who has the really high base power move of Flare Blitz, which gets even further boosted by Sheer Force. Great combo. And I think a big part of the strength of Darmanitan in single battles is the fact that if you knock out your opponent's Pokemon, you don't take any damage that turn, which helps us understand why it's never really been very good in double battles, because in double battles, even if you knock out one of your opponent's Pokemon, you're still going to take an attack from their partner most of the time. Darmanitan is very frail, and Flare Blitz does recoil damage. And so like when you consider that your best move causes you to lose a fair bit of health, and you consider the fact that you're not that bulky to begin with, and you consider the fact that most of the time you're going to have to take a follow-up attack, it gets kind of dicey kind of quickly. Also, Darmanitan in double battles has to worry about attacking into Protect being used on most Pokemon in the game. And basically, if you attack into Protect, you're probably going to lose Darmanitan from the partner's attack because, again, it's very frail. It's also not that fast. Like, it's certainly not a slow Pokemon, but in order to outspeed a lot of the faster end of most formats, you would need to hold the Choice Scarf item, which then limits your move choice and your flexibility and just creates more counterplay. The other thing about Darmanitan in double battles is that the Intimidate ability is quite prevalent. It's very prevalent, in fact. And in single battles, it's not such a big deal because Intimidate just isn't that common. And again, you're only dealing with one Pokemon at a time. But in double battles, losing a third of your attacking power like is actually a pretty big deal, especially when your Pokemon is already pretty frail. I think Darmanitan is sick, and I really like that there was a brief period where Galarian Darmanitan was pretty good. And I think it's like a really cool redesign. I think in general, it's just like a really cool Pokemon. I like it a lot personally, but it's not very good. Okay, so it's on my list, which brings us to number 6, and a Pokemon that initially I had much higher on this list because I thought it was worse, but it's actually it's not good, okay, but it saw a little bit of use. Number 6 on our list is Turtonator. Turtonator is a really funny Pokemon because it seems fake. It does not seem like a real Pokemon that exists. Like, the design to me isn't that memorable. I think it's from a generation that like people aren't as familiar with, and it like never has been good, I think, in most competitive formats. And so like it seems like a fake Pokemon. I think this is like if you were doing one of those like man on the street videos where you're like, name the fake, spot the real Pokemon, spot the fake Pokemon. I think this is one they would have to try and fool people, which is kind of a shame. I mean, I don't like Turtonator that much, but I think there are some things about Turtonator that are cool. Mostly the typing. Turtonator is a fire and dragon type Pokemon, which isn't especially common. There's like Reshiram and Mega Charizard X and probably another one or two that I'm forgetting about, but for the most part, you don't actually get access to this typing all that much, and the typings complement each other pretty well. Fire is weak to water, which dragon cancels out that weakness, and then dragon is weak to ice and fairy, both of which fire cancels out. Also, the fact that dragon can hit steel type Pokemon and fire hits steel for super effective, so overall the synergy is pretty good. There's a couple things holding Turtonator back though. The first is that it only has one ability, and I understand why it has this ability. It's shell armor. Turtonator, turtle with a big shell on its back. Shell armor, I don't need to explain this one, I think. And the second thing is actually the stats, where Turtonator basically, it's very tanky on the physical side, but it actually has relatively low HP. HP is a bit important when you want your Pokemon to survive. Turtonator's special bulk is fine, but nothing to write home about. Its offenses are below average for what you'd want, and it's extremely slow. So basically it has a good defense stat, but everything else ranges from pretty terrible to just regular, like average. And so there's not really a good way for it to contribute to battles because I don't know, it doesn't have the stats to keep up. I think this is a shame as well because Turtonator, like, I think that they thought it was going to be better than it is, and so they gave it, I don't know, like they gave it a signature move, and so I'm like, I don't understand why you give this thing a signature move if you don't think it's going to be like at least a little bit used. And the signature move is interesting. It's called Shell Trap, and it's a 150 base power fire type move, so effectively a fire type hyper beam. But the move is really interesting because despite being super strong, it only will activate if your opponent actually hits Turtonator, and not only hits Turtonator, but it has to be a physical move. So using a special move or a status move does not activate Shell Trap. And so like if your opponent doesn't want to get hit by the Shell Trap, they literally don't have to. They can just not hit Turtonator with physical attacks. And if the trap doesn't go off, you just waste your attack for the turn. So I mean, it's not a very good move. It is funny, but it's certainly not good. That being said, the reason why Turtonator is not higher up on this list, and the reason why, you know, it's actually relatively, you know, it's in the bottom half, so it's not the worst fire type, is because there was one period during, I believe, Sword and Shield, where Turtonator was usable, not great, but usable. Basically, Sword and Shield introduced a new move called Body Press, which does more damage the higher the user's defense stat is instead of their attack stat. And since Turtonator has such a high base defense stat and gets access to the move Iron Defense, it worked as this kind of setup sweeper where you would use Iron Defense, become incredibly tanky on the physical side, and then use Body Press to do damage. I think it was more of like a gimmicky Pokemon that was used a bit because it was like so unexpected rather than anything else, but it did have a little usage. Not enough to save it from this list, but enough to land it on the bottom half. It's not a good Pokemon, but it's not the worst. It's one of the worst fire type Pokemon of all time for sure, but it's not the worst. Coming in at number 6, we have Oricorio Bile. Oricorio in general is a pretty cool Pokemon. I think a lot of people really like Oricorio. I personally think Oricorio is really cool. And the main reason why Oricorio I think is so popular is because it has a really neat signature ability, and one of the only abilities I think that allows a Pokemon to attack twice in the same turn. Actually, it can attack up to 4 times, I think. Oricorio's signature ability is called Dancer. And basically, if certain moves have dance in the title, I think they all have dance in the title, whenever any Pokemon uses one of these moves, Oricorio will also use this move. So for example, Oricorio paired with Volcarona can use Quiver Dance, and then Oricorio will automatically use Quiver Dance as well. There's 4 different Oricorio forms, and each of the forms is a flying type, but then they have different secondary types, and the Bile form is a fire type Pokemon. Each of the Oricorio forms also learns the move Revelation Dance, which changes type based on the type that they have that's not flying. So in the fire type form, Revelation Dance is a fire type attack. And also what's cool is that if you terrestrialize, then Revelation Dance basically just becomes Terra Blast, but a little bit stronger. It takes the type of your Terra type. So I think it's a pretty cool move. Oricorio has a lot going for it, and I think because of that, they were worried it might be too strong, because Dancer is like, if you think about it, a really broken ability. Like being able to attack twice in the same turn, potentially up to 4 times if your opponent also uses dancing moves, is like probably a little bit overpowered. And if Oricorio were good, then you would have the Oricorio forms like using each other's dancer moves. Like your Oricorio would Revelation Dance, and then that would trigger your opponent's dancer, and then they would also Revelation Dance. Like you can see how this get a little bit out of hand. And so the main weakness of Oricorio and the reason why it's not very good is the fact that its stats are just abysmal. And I don't disagree with this. Like I understand why they made the stats so bad, but Oricorio doesn't really have a single good stat. They're not awful. Like they're not so bad that you would never see Oricorio used. Like occasionally you'll see people kind of building theme teams or more gimmicky teams built around Oricorio. But I think in this case, the Pokemon Company played it pretty safe and said, you know what, this seems really powerful. Like we like the concept, we like the design, we like kind of this signature theming, but we don't want it to be that broken. And so they tuned the power down probably to a level where they were sure it wasn't going to be good. And they succeeded. It's not good. But I think it's actually okay for a Pokemon like Oricorio. Like I think it would be bad if this thing were one of the best Pokemon in the game, or even if there were formats where it could kind of threaten to take over. And so I think that in many ways, this is actually like, it is one of the worst fire type Pokemon competitively, but at the same time, I think it's kind of a big success because they got the really cool designs. They got the cool, like unique ability and kind of this like new interaction, and they did it without ruining the competitive game. So actually Oricorio, you are one of the worst fire types, but you get a big thumbs up from me. Good job. Okay, coming in at number 5 is a Pokemon that many of you expected to see on this list, but you probably thought it would be higher up. It's Simisear. The elemental monkeys from Gen 5, I think, are some of the most popular Pokemon to hate on. They're very easy targets, mostly because they suck. The designs are not especially inspired, in my opinion. They're not very good Pokemon. None of them are very good Pokemon, in fact. And they're from a generation that received a lot of hate at the time. And also they're just like given to the player during the story in a way that like it works with starter Pokemon, but I think because the monkeys aren't very exciting, people just don't like the monkeys. There's probably other reasons too. And Simisear, to be clear, is definitely one of the worst fire type Pokemon of all time. First, it has no secondary type. So what you see is what you get. It's a pure fire type. And like sometimes it is good to be a pure type. Like there are situations where it is good and scenarios where it is good, but typically having an extra type gives you access to more resistances. Sometimes it means more weaknesses too, but also different coverage moves and more moves that you have access to. Simisear is a Pokemon that does not learn very many good moves. In fact, it learns so few moves that some of the best coverage moves it gets are like Grass Knot, which isn't terrible, but it's not good. Sometimes Pokemon are good even when their move pool is kind of shallow though, so it's not such a big deal. But the main problem with Simisear, in my opinion, is that the stats are just awful. Like this is a Pokemon clearly designed to get you through the early game of an in-game playthrough, but not to get you much further than that, I think. The only redeeming factor it has is that it's decently fast, and none of its stats are like in a vacuum so terrible. Both the defense and the special defense are a bit low, but they're not like, you know, paper thin like Kartana's, you know, special defense. They're bad, but they're not awful, if that makes sense. The HP is the same thing. It's not great. It's certainly not terrible though. But the problem is that it doesn't have a good offensive stat. Both its attack and special attack are relatively low for what you want from a damaging Pokemon. And when you put all this together, you get a Pokemon that like its only redeeming quality is its speed, but it doesn't really have the move pool to take advantage of that speed or the stats to take advantage of that speed. And it's also not that fast in the first place. So it's a bit lackluster to say the least. The reason why I don't have Simisear lower on this list is primarily because it gets access to the move Nasty Plot. Nasty Plot allows you to double your special attack the first time you use it, and then you can use it even more to boost up even further. And it also gets access to the spread move Heat Wave. And so when I was thinking about how to rank some of these Pokemon that have no results, I kind of put myself in the shoes of how easy would it be to actually use this Pokemon and have it contribute something. Since none of the Pokemon on the list at this point have any results, like, I mean, they're all pretty bad. I thought that for Simisear, the fact that it has a set that I could see being viable in the right circumstances, viable being used very, very generously here to be clear, that was enough for me to say, you know what, I think it shouldn't be higher on the list. That being said, this is an awful Pokemon. We are in real bad territory at this point, and I do not recommend you use this Pokemon if you want to win. It's pretty bad, but it's technically, I could think of something for it to do, which is not the case for a lot of the Pokemon remaining on this list. Okay, we're on to number 4. This is one I'm very nervous about, so please be nice to me. I'm very sorry in advance. Number 4 is Flareon. And I like Flareon, okay? I think it's an incredible Pokemon from a design perspective. I think it's iconic. It evolves from Eevee. We all like Flareon, right? Everybody likes Flareon, right? We're not saying anything bad about Flareon from a moral standpoint. When it comes to evolutions though, Flareon is kind of clearly the worst in terms of competitive Pokemon, okay? That's all I'm talking about here. Flareon in some ways has similar problems to Simisear. I feel like whenever Pokemon are introduced as part of a trio, they tend to be really stingy with the move pools. Like you don't want to be giving your fire type Pokemon too many grass or water type moves because then like you wouldn't use the other members of the trio, right? Maybe this is just like something I've noticed and maybe it's not real, but I feel like generally the trios tend to be like limited move pool. Flareon's move pool is actually, I think, even worse than Simisear's. It learns effectively 0 useful coverage moves. Like it gets fire moves and it gets a couple normal moves which are usable, but like that's kind of it, except for some very niche situations. And on top of having a really shallow move pool, Flareon's stats are also, I mean, let's be honest, they look like a generation 1 Pokemon, right? These are like, this is before power, this is like the pre-power creep. This is the first generation. They weren't all designed to be, you know, competitively viable. I don't think that's a bad thing, but you really notice that with Flareon. To Flareon's credit, it has pretty decent special bulk. The HP is pretty low, but the special bulk is, especially for a generation 1 Pokemon, pretty high. And to Flareon's credit, it has a really good base attack stat for the time. 130 base attack. That's actually really good. The problem is the other stats. The defense is pretty low, to say the least. It's not a good defense stat, and given the HP is also pretty low, it means that Flareon's pretty frail, and it's also really slow. Like, and it's also not so slow that you can justify using it inside of Trick Room. It's in that horrible middle ground where it's too slow to be used outside of Trick Room and too fast to be used inside. And when you kind of combine the stat issues with the fact that the move pool is pretty lacking, you run into some problems. That being said, Flareon does have one redeeming trait, and if you were going to try to use it, I think this is what you'd have to build around, which is that while its base ability is not very good, it's Flash Fire, similar issue to we had with Houndoom, where it's just not a bulky enough Pokemon to really take advantage of this. Its hidden ability is Guts, and Guts is actually a pretty good ability because it gives you a 50% attack boost if you're affected by a status condition. The problem is that the best way to activate Guts is with the Flame Orb item, which burns the holder and causes them to take, you know, damage every turn. The other option is the Toxic Orb, which affects the user with badly poison, which is a poison that increases in damage at the end of every single turn. Burn is much preferable because when you have the Guts ability, you're not affected by the attack dropping effect of Burn. So effectively, you're just giving up 1/16 of your health every turn for a 50% boost in power. Pretty significant, right? But the problem is because Flareon's a fire type Pokemon, you can't burn it. Like your Flame Orb won't activate, and so you need to use the Toxic Orb, which means Flareon, which is already quite frail by the way, has to instead like lose even more HP compared to Burn. It's just terrible. It's awful. I think that if you wanted to use Flareon, you'd want to use it in a format with Terrestrialization, and you'd probably want to use like Terra Normal Facade, and that way you could Terra Normal and hold the Flame Orb item and just let yourself get burnt. It's not a good strategy, but you could do it. It's the only thing I could think of when it comes to Flareon. Anyway, I really do like Flareon as a Pokemon. I think it's super cute. I like that it's so fluffy. Like I like it a lot in general, but I don't like the idea of having to use it because every one of the other evolutions has something going for it that like makes it somewhat viable in the right context. And in fact, I've used many evolutions at different points over the course of my career, but Flareon is the one that it's so difficult. It's even worse than Glaceon. Okay, before we get into the top 3 worst fire type Pokemon of all time, we have a couple dishonorable mentions. These are Pokemon that like initially I thought might be on the list, but in doing some research, I realized that they definitely don't belong here, but I think they're still fun to talk about. First of all, Moltres. Moltres is obviously a legendary Pokemon, but it's not really that good in most formats. And we're talking specifically about Kanto Moltres, not Galarian Moltres. That being said, there was a period where Moltres was actually not popular and not like good, but usable. And it even got top 4 at an international level event, which is a huge tournament, the second highest level, only behind the World Championships. So I definitely couldn't put it on this list given that. Castform Sunny Form, I thought about putting on this list, but it seems stupid to put a Pokemon who's like was only fire type when it changed form. Like Castform's not a pure fire type. It's not really a fire type Pokemon. It's a normal type that can temporarily become a fire type Pokemon. So even though it's a really bad Pokemon, I didn't think that it was a fire type enough to be on this list. Pyroar. Many people probably don't know about Pyroar because it's not very popular, but Pyroar is a Pokemon that it's not very good, and if you tried to use it nowadays, it would be pretty difficult, but it was actually used a decent bit back in 2014. That was a really slow format, and because it was a normal type and pretty fast, it was able to use Hyper Voice and do tons of damage. It also gets the Rivalry ability, which is a weird ability that gives you a power boost if the opponent is the same gender as you, and at the time, the most used Mega Evolution was Mega Kangaskhan, who's always female, and so actually Rivalry Pyroar was able to do so much damage with the high base power of Overheat that it could actually deal, I think with Mega Kangaskhan, maybe with like a Life Orb or something, but yeah, it could do a ton of damage. And so it was used a little bit during 2014, and so I didn't think that I could put it here. Initially, I had Camerupt on this list because, I mean, it doesn't seem like a very good Pokemon, but Mega Camerupt was actually used a little bit in the 2018 format, which was the second year of Ultra Sun and the first year of Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, second year of Generation 7. It actually has, I think, out of everything I've mentioned so far, the most usage and the most success. So it's actually not a great Pokemon, but it has enough results that I certainly couldn't leave on this list. And then last but not least, Emboar, one of the least popular fire starters of all time. One of my personal favorites. I left Emboar off this list specifically because my first ever regional tournament, which kind of kickstarted my whole career, I won with Emboar. And so I like it for that reason. And I also got top 8 at the World Championships with Emboar as well. They are making a new Emboar form, and I'm a big Emboar fan in Legends ZA. And so I hope that Emboar will be good, but I don't have high hopes for it. But you never know, maybe. Okay, now we're into the top 3. So these are like the really bad fire types at this point. And number 3, I think, is another one that's going to make people mad at me. It's Rapidash. Rapidash is so cool from a design angle. I think that like the shot of Rapidash in the first opening, you know what I'm talking about, in the anime opening? Don't play the song, we'll get in trouble, but maybe you can show the visuals. Like, I don't know, like Ash riding on the flaming horse, I feel like that's gotta have been at least a little bit of a factor in Pokemon success. Maybe, you know, like not a lot, but a little bit, right? I mean, it's so cool. It's a unicorn that's on fire. Like, I mean, that's awesome, right? The problem is that's pretty much the only good thing I can say about Rapidash. Like many of the Pokemon on our list, Rapidash is held back mostly by its stats. Like, it has other weaknesses as well, but the stats are not helping. It was certainly a fast Pokemon for the time it was released, but other than that, I can't really say anything good about its stats. Rapidash in many ways is basically just Simisear. Like, it has a high base speed, its other stats are all pretty bad across the board, it can't really do any damage, and its move pool sucks, okay? On top of that, similar to Simisear, which I didn't even mention this with Simisear, but like Rapidash's abilities are turbo bad. It gets the ability Runaway, which doesn't work in trainer battles, which is all of competitive Pokemon. Flash Fire, which we've talked about a couple times. I don't even think Flash Fire is a bad ability, but I feel like you would not get that impression if you watch this video. And then it gets Flame Body, which is a good ability, but is better the tankier the user is. And because Rapidash isn't very tanky, it's not very good. The only good thing I can say about Rapidash is that it's a horse, and that means that it gets access to the move High Horsepower, which is actually a pretty good ground type attack. And so it has like a good coverage move, and Rapidash is a physical attacker, so it can actually use ground type attacks, and it gets a couple other useful moves as well, but the stats are just so bad that it's really like you really can't ever justify it. The thing that makes me angriest about Rapidash is Galarian Rapidash. They created a whole new Rapidash form, which to me is an opportunity to actually try and make the Pokemon like somewhat viable, and Galarian Rapidash is equally as bad, if not worse. So yeah, bad job on that one, Pokemon. I'm pissed about that one. Anyway, I've horsed on Rapidash enough. Now it's time to talk about the two worst fire type Pokemon of all time. Coming in at number 2 is Magcargo. What does Magcargo evolve from again? Can someone let me know in the comments? I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, Magcargo. There's a lot of bad things about Magcargo. First of all, unlike several of our past entries, Magcargo is a dual type, but it's one of the dual types that makes it actually worse than being a pure fire type Pokemon. Magcargo is fire and rock type, which is undoubtedly one of the worst type combinations in the game. The problem is that you have a quadruple weakness to both water and ground, and having even one quadruple weakness is like, I mean, it can be really bad, but having two and having them be common types, that's a big problem. It's also weak to both fighting and rock, which like these are all relatively common types in the competitive game. Fire and rock also just don't really complement each other that well, in my opinion. Like, I guess fire hits the steel types that rock can't hit, but like there's not that much good overlap here. The big issue with Magcargo though is, as with many of these Pokemon, is the stats are just terrible. The biggest issue is the speed. Magcargo is one of the slowest Pokemon in the game. It hits the 30 speed stat, which very few Pokemon get below. That's the same speed stat as Amoonguss, and Amoonguss is obviously notorious for being one of the slowest Pokemon in the game. And the issue is that it can't do anything with this low speed stat. Like, sometimes you have really slow Pokemon like Amoonguss who can, you know, use Spore to put your opponents out of commission, can use Pollen Puff to heal your team, can use Rage Powder to keep your team safe. Magcargo has nothing. Like, it really can't do much. It is decently tanky. It has a really good base defense stat and a usable special defense stat. Not a good one, but it's not terrible. But the problem is it has really low HP. It has such low HP, in fact, that it kind of cancels out the fact that it has a decent defense stat, if it wasn't already canceled out due to the fact that it has 2 quadruple weaknesses. That being said, sometimes Pokemon that are really slow can afford to have like kind of suspect defense stats if they're really strong. Because if a Pokemon is strong enough, then you can get it inside of Trick Room and then have it do tons of damage, and it doesn't really matter that it's like taking more damage because it's just going to KO everything before they can attack anyway. So what's Magcargo's offense is looking like? Well, some of the worst on this entire list. It has a terrible, and I'm gonna say it's an unusable attack stat, and its special attack, it would be usable on a Pokemon like Amoonguss or another supporting Pokemon, but on a Pokemon that can't actually support its team, it's not good. Magcargo has one of the worst stat distributions across any Pokemon ever. Sometimes Pokemon like this can be saved by their abilities, and while Magcargo has it has Flame Body, which as we talked about can be good, and it is physically bulky, so it can actually use Flame Body. The other abilities are not amazing. It has Magma Armor, which prevents it from being frozen. This is mostly useless because like you can use a fire type move from behind freeze, some of them at least, and thaw yourself. And it also gets Weak Armor, which makes it faster but frailer, which is not, it doesn't make it faster or frailer enough to actually make Magcargo go fast enough. So effectively this just makes you worse. So really Flame Body is the only option, which is fine, but it's mostly useful for hatching eggs and not for using Magcargo. I will say Magcargo's move pool is not so terrible. It's certainly not good, but it's not awful. It gets Recover, it gets Amnesia, it gets Toxic, it gets Will-O-Wisp, or it used to get Toxic at least. There are some moves that it can learn, but the real thing is that it doesn't get any super broken moves. Like, yeah, there is stuff that it can do, but like not enough to justify using Magcargo. I do think it's a really funny Pokemon, and I do like the design. I also feel like I always argue with people about whether or not Magcargo is a horse. It is a horse, if you're wondering, but there's almost no fire type Pokemon that are worse than it. And I say almost because it's time to talk about the number 1 slot. The absolute worst fire type Pokemon of all time is Heatmore. My guess is many of you forgot about Heatmore. Let me know in the comments if you forgot that Heatmore was a Pokemon. I'm curious. Where do I even begin when I talk about Heatmore? I mean, this thing is not good. First of all, pure fire type Pokemon. Technically better than being fire and rock type like Magcargo, but still not good. You'd rather have a useful dual type. Second of all, the stats, okay? The stats are actually, I mean, I've been looking at some really bad stats over the course of this video. They're not the worst. Like, we have seen worse, but it's a similar problem to many Pokemon in this video where while none of the stats on their own are so bad that they're unusable, none of them are good. And you have to be able to do something with your stats. Heatmore also has like really low defense stats for what it is. You would think a Pokemon that's this slow and this weak would have decent defenses, but no, its defenses are actually solidly mediocre. Like even they're bad. The mediocre is being too nice. They're bad. And the HP is fine, but not good enough to compensate for the fact that their defenses are so low. The biggest issue with Heatmore though is that there's nothing for it to do. Like the move pool's bad, the stats are bad, and the abilities are also bad. Heatmore has 3 abilities, and one of them is Flash Fire, okay? And that's probably the best of the 3. It gets Gluttony, not super useful except in niche situations, and White Smoke, which, I mean, can be useful, but not really on Heatmore. I guess Flash Fire might be an ability they give to the bad Pokemon. I don't think that Flash Fire itself is a bad ability, but I think if they think a Pokemon's gonna be bad, they're like, give it Flash Fire. That's my new conspiracy theory. Anyway, Heatmore's moves are awful. Like they're not terrible, I guess, but they're certainly not good. Like I'm looking through them now and like there's nothing for it to do. It doesn't get any, like there's nothing. I can't, like, I mean, you can Will-O-Wisp stuff by being a fire type. It gets a couple decent physical attacks like Knock Off and Low Kick, but like why are you using Knock Off, Low Kick, Heatmore? You know what I'm saying? It doesn't get Sucker Punch. That's the one redeeming thing I can see out of this thing. But no, like honestly, out of all the Pokemon on this list, I think that I would personally have the hardest time using Heatmore. Even with Magcargo, you could do some kind of setup thing like Iron Defense, or I don't think it's Iron Defense, Acid Armor, Amnesia, Recover. Maybe you run Curse, Recover. It would be easier with Terastallization. With Heatmore, I'm like, I don't know, like nothing you do is going to make this Pokemon feel good. It doesn't have enough good supporting moves to justify using it. It doesn't have enough offensive stats to justify using it. It doesn't have a good enough like broken offensive moves to justify using it. It doesn't have any good abilities. Like I can't say anything good about it. I do like Heatmore from a lore perspective because I think it's really funny. They made a fire anteater Pokemon to eat the bug and steel ant Pokemon. I think that's really cool. And that's the only good thing I can say about Heatmore. A lot of the Pokemon on this list, I'm like, I don't really hate them. Like, you know, like they're bad Pokemon, but I like them anyway. Heatmore, I think I actually dislike because it's so bad. Like I'm really trying to find anything good to point out about this Pokemon, but like I literally see nothing. I will say one good thing about Heatmore, which is that I could see a world where they give Heatmore an evolution in the future, not because it's a popular Pokemon, they probably won't do it, but because like when you're giving a Pokemon an evolution, you need to make sure that the pre-evolution won't be broken if you give it the Eviolite item. And I think that Heatmore is so bad that even if you increase both its defenses by 50%, it would still be pretty worthless. So I don't know. I think I'm holding out for like Mega Heatmore or, you know, super evolved Heatmore or something. Then I would be interested in it. Maybe make it a dual type. But yeah, for now, Heatmore is the #1 worst fire type Pokemon of all time. Thanks for watching. This is a new series, so if you have feedback, let me know in the comments below. I do try to read every comment. And if watching me kind of talk smack about all these fire type Pokemon has made you want to know what the good fire type Pokemon are, I actually a long time ago made a video titled "What is the best fire type Pokemon?" which similar vibe to this, but we actually get to talk about good Pokemon. You should check it out.